Thursday is well known for their high value boots that are sold at a very fair price. And part of the reason they're able to do that is because a lot of the manufacturing is in Mexico, but they just released this Made in the USA line. And so for this $400 and under Made in America boot series that we're doing, it was perfect for the series, and they wanted to throw their hat in the ring, so they sent me this boot to cut in half, see how it's built, run through the various tests that we run to see how it stacks up against the competition. And thanks to Thursday for sponsoring this video. So what is this boot? Well, this is their logger boot that retails for $285. So it's over $100 cheaper than the Wolverine 1,000-mile boot that we did last time for this series. And the thing that makes this boot unique is that it's a logger style boot, but it's built in a very Thursday way, where instead of these Pacific Northwest brands with a really wide toe box, huge heel, really big and chunky, Thursday is known for their slim silhouettes, their really refined styling, the more pointy toe box, the tighter eyelets, and just a generally more dressy style put on a logger platform. So now that we know what this boot is and who it's for, let's start going through the details, starting with the leather first. So this is a waxed flesh Chrome XL. It's about 2 to 2.5 millimeters thick. So a nice thick leather, a little bit thicker than the 1,000 miles. And this is one of my favorite leathers out there because it's a normal Wolverine Chrome XL, but it's flipped and finished on the fuzzy flesh side. It's also called a rough out or finished flesh, and this is the exact same leather that we used on the Indy 1 and the Indy 2. And I love it because when you first get it, it's a really clean finished look with a little bit of texture, but as you wear it, it starts to, actually I think I have, yeah, I got this guy in here. It starts to show the undertones, it really starts to give some highlights and lowlights and really starts looking nice. But the nice thing is, with this leather, if you want it to stay clean and flat like this, you just add a little bit of a conditioner to it or a wax, and it flattens right back out and looks as good as new. It absorbs scratches and scars and beating them up a lot better than a grain out leather because it's how loose and fibrous the outer is. It's easier just to lay back flat. And this leather is made by Wolverine out of Chicago, Illinois, which is probably the most popular tannery in the world, and they're well known for this style of leather. But when it comes to grading this leather, we wanted to run it through the test. We burned it first, and just like the other Chrome XL and the 1,000-mile boots, they take a really long time to burn because it's so infused with oils and other tanning compounds and just different conditioners. You almost have to boil off all the conditioner on the inside of the leather first before it starts burning. But being that it's a flesh out leather, it takes even longer to burn because it's those loose fibers that you're burning instead of that really tight grain pattern. Because when you burn a regular leather, that grain will shrivel up and shrink and start to crack. Whereas these loose fleshy fibers, they don't have that tight pattern. So rough out leather is a more fire resistant leather than a regular grain out leather. And then if we look at the cross section, you can see there's a full slab of grain in there. And like we said in the previous video, I think they shave off just the tiniest little bit of that top layer, but there's still a big slab of it in there. So if we take the macro lens and look really closely, you can see that it is just exactly as we described. Those fibers are laid flat, and we'll rough it up a little bit so you can see how loose those fibers actually are once you start beating them up. So if we were to grade this leather based on those 3 tests, I would say it's pretty clearly an A grade leather. And so it's right on par with the 1,000-mile boots. And I would actually prefer this leather just a little bit more. It's a little bit thicker. It's a little bit more of a durable leather. And it seems like it's a higher quality Chrome XL than the 1,000-mile boots. And to compare the puncture resistance between the 2 boots, we cut a swatch out of the Thursday boots and put it on the puncture test, and it took 98 pounds to puncture through. And if you compare that to the 1,000-mile boots, that took only 47 pounds. So nearly twice as resistant or puncture resistant as the Wolverines. So I'm not really sure where that came from. Maybe it's the thicker leather, maybe it's the fact that it is a flesh out leather, and maybe it is a higher quality leather from Wolverine. But it was twice as puncture resistant for some reason. So if you have any ideas on why that might be, let me know in the comments, because I'm not fully sure why it did that. And then if we look at the lining of this boot, there's no lining on the shaft of the boot and the quarters, because that's just the grain that we talked about. But there is a lining in the vamp, and I'm not exactly sure what it is, so we'll see when we get it cut in half. And then next to the midsole, so this is another easy one. You can tell exactly what it is. It's a layer of vegetable tanned leather as the midsole. It doesn't look like it's quite as thick as the 1,000-mile boot, but once again, we'll see when you get it cut in half. But at least it is a full leather midsole. And then as for the insole, it's a permanent insole, and it's 2 layers of pour-on. So you've got a 2.2 millimeter layer of pour-on and a 1.5 millimeter layer of pour-on, both topped with a deerskin leather lining. And it's not a half sock liner like we saw on the 1,000-mile boots. It's a full sock liner, but it's not removable. And so a lot of people with this type of boots, they like to be able to put in their own custom orthotics or be able to swap out insoles how they want. So that is something to keep in mind with this boot, is that insole is permanent, but it is at least squishy. You got lots of foam in there. And the part of the reason why people like Thursdays is the fact that while you're breaking this boot in, you've got all that foam underneath your foot, so it makes it a lot easier to break these in, especially with this thick of a leather. And then if we look at the outsole, it's that Cuban profiled heel, which is really popular with like the Pacific Northwest brands that make all the logging boots. So it's got that right style. But they've done an interesting thing with the combination of outsoles. So you've got like a regular, almost dress shoe top lift in the heel, and you've got that really rugged Vibram lug sole for the forefoot. So it's really similar to what we've seen with the V100s on a lot of the work boots that we've cut apart. It's just a slightly different version, but it looks like it has just as deep of lugs, and it actually looks thicker than the V100. We put the durometer tester on it to see how it compared, and it's right at the exact same density or hardness as the V100. So it's a really similar feel underfoot. And when I first looked at this, I wasn't really sure if it was a full leather heel stack or if they were trying to hide something with this texturing, but what they've done is they've taken a 36 grit sanding drum and put a lot of texture on this heel for that really ruggedy look. It's a style preference. I personally would rather just have a really clean heel profile, but for this boot it makes sense because you got that slim silhouette and they're trying to combine this dressier look with this more rugged look. But the one potential downside of this heel is this top lift is pretty thin. Like if we look at this compared to the 1,000 Mile boot, it's half as thick as the 1,000 Mile boot. So you're not gonna get quite as much wear out of this heel as you will some of the other boots because it's so thin. But the nice thing about this is it's such a simple and really hardy construction that you could take, once you start wearing through that, you just take it to your local cobbler and for 20 bucks, he'll slap a new one on there, drive some nails through it, and you're good to go. And it's so easy to do. I would even just recommend you do it at home. Like once this wears through, just buy a top lift, glue it on, drive some nails through that thick heel stack, and you're good to go. We also want to do a puncture test on the outsole, so we put it on our rig, and it took 189.5 pounds to pierce through. And then finally to the construction of this boot. So this is a true 360 Goodyear welted construction, and you can tell that by that stitch line going all the way around the heel. And I really like the fact that they used a true leather welt to make this shoe, because a lot of times in these $300 and under boots, they get away with doing a leather looking synthetic welt that's not leather, and it ends up splitting and cracking over time because leather is just one of the best materials for being flexed over and over, getting wet, getting dry, getting material spilled on it that hardly ever cracks compared to that synthetic welt that eventually over time it just splits and your boots are as good as done. So it's looking pretty good so far for Thursday. There's not a whole lot I can point to from the outside as negatives. So we'll see when we get it cut in half, because that's really what tells the real story of these boots, especially this $400 and under price range, because any corners cut usually happen on the inside of the boot where it's not as visible. So let's cut them in half. All right, we got it cut in half, and that officially killed my bandsaw blade. It skipped the wheel a couple times and completely ate it away, and so finally I have to buy a new bandsaw blade, but let's see what's inside. So the first thing I noticed is it's not a true toe cap. You know, the true toe cap has the double layer on top, and the reason they usually put toe caps on boots is to give you an extra layer of protection for wearing through the toe of your boot, especially in work boots when you're on your knees and working around. The toe is one of the first spots that wears out. But with this boot, it's not a true toe cap, which for the positioning of this boot being a more dressy style logger boot, it makes sense to maintain that slim silhouette. And we've seen it over and over again for boots in this price range, so I'm not super concerned about it. Obviously, for the durability standpoint, it'd be better if it was a true toe cap. And if we look at the lining, it's actually a really decent lining material. It's a solid B grade leather that definitely still has some grain in it and is not just a cheap suede that they've thrown in there. Like, I've still blown away by those Lucchese boots that they just threw a really cheap pigskin in there with a plastic coating on top that was split. That's where they hide all the crappy materials, and they have not done that with the Thursdays, because that's a pretty decent leather. And you can see that they've used cork as the fillings where that void is created by the Goodyear welt, so that's a good sign. A lot of times cheaper boots will use foam. And you can see that giant shank that completely destroyed my bandsaw. And similar to the 1,000 Mile boot, you've got that fiberboard insole with the compressed cardboard reinforcement at the heel. And unlike the 1,000 Mile boots, you've got that full length insole with the 2 layers of pour-on underneath. So you don't have that issue of the overlapping insoles that are gonna pill up in different directions. That was a shockingly terrible thing in the 1,000 Mile boots. And then you have your cellulose toe stiffener and heel counter. And you can see this counter cover on the inside is a suede counter cover, so not the best counter cover material. It's right on par with the 1,000 Mile boots. Both of them are just a suede that doesn't have that grain to give it that extra strength, but at least it's leather. You know, I just hate when it's a fabric and you know it's just gonna wear out in like 3 months. So now that we have it completely cut apart and analyzed, how does it stack up against the Mexican-made Captain boot that we've cut apart before? Is it better? Is it worse? Is it worth the money, extra money to get the American-made boot? Well, if you look at these two, the US made boot has a thicker shank, it has a better outsole, thicker leather on the upper, a better heel stack, and slightly less man-made materials on the inside. And really the only advantage that the Mexican boot has over the American made or the US made boot is that the leather midsole is slightly thicker. But other than that, the American, or everyone gets mad at me for saying America versus the US. The US made boot is better in every way. But are they worth the $85 premium to get this premium version? I think they are. If you look just at the materials alone, they are upgraded, and I think they're definitely worth a little bit more money. But I also think you are paying that premium to have it made in the United States, because it does cost more to have stuff made in the US. But it's not so outrageous that I'd be like, because there's a lot of brands out there that as soon as they have that made in the USA stamp on their boot, they just jack the price up because they know people are willing to pay it. I don't think this one is ridiculously overpriced. For all the leather for all the stuff that's upgraded and the fact that it's made in the US for $85 more for a taller boot with better leather and everything, I think it's money well spent. But how does the Thursday boot rank against literally the only other American-made boot in this series that we've cut apart, the 1,000 Mile Wolverine? Well, the way that we're gonna do this is we're gonna rank it on a board, and we're gonna call it the MITUSA board, made in the United States of America board, and rank them strictly on quality, not on value, not what you're getting per dollar, but strictly on quality no matter what the price is, as long as it's under $400. So obviously we didn't do this last time because there's not much interest in putting a single boot on a board that's comparing multiple boots. So we put 1,000 Mile boot up there first. How does this Thursday boot compare to it? Well, I would say the Thursday boot is a better boot than the 1,000 Mile boot. So I'm gonna put the Thursday above the 1,000 Mile boot. And I think it's better because it does actually have a full leather heel stack where the 1,000 Mile did not. It has thicker leather, it has better leather. It has a significantly better sock liner than the 1,000 Mile boot. And the Thursday still has all the same materials that the 1,000 Mile boot is built on, with just a few of them upgraded to be better. So I think it's clearly better than the 1,000 Mile boot. So overall, I think this is a really great value for a boot made in the United States. You know, for $285, you really do get a lot of materials and quality out of a sub $300 boot. So let me know what you guys think of the Made in the United States Thursday line, and what other boots you want us to cut apart in the MITUSA series. I think that's what we're gonna call it. I think that name's fun, because we're doing all the boots made in the United States for $400 and under. And let me know what other boots you want us to add to the MITUSA series that are $400 and under that are made in the United States, because this series is going to be really interesting, and this might be my favorite series we've ever done. And we also have Mocktober coming up, so we're going to do some cross-pollination between my two favorite series, Mocktober and MITUSA. So thank you guys. See ya.